This is your instructor, Randy Jenkins, for your Western Civ course this semester, Western Civ 1. And we're going to talk a few minutes today about the Pirenne Thesis and how it's relevant to the chapter about the end of the Roman Empire that we're looking at this week. What you see here is the Roman Empire at its greatest extent. That was in about 117 AD at the time of the Emperor Trajan. The Roman Empire is all in pink and stretches from England in the far northwest down to Spain and Africa to the Egypt in the east, as far east as the Caspian Sea, listed there as Armenia. So it's an enormous extent, and what you'll notice from the map, the one thing that stands out, is that the Roman Empire is centered around the Mediterranean Sea, labeled on this map as Mare Internum, or the Interior Sea. Everybody knows that in 476, the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, depicted in the gold coin in the upper right-hand corner here, was deposed by the barbarian king in the year 476. And that ended the long line of Roman emperors. We see on this map, highlighted in different colors, the location of all the different barbarian tribes as they ended up in the Roman Empire in the 5th and 6th centuries. So what caused the fall of Rome? There are many theories about that. They range from the ridiculous, such as that the Romans were poisoned by drinking water from lead pipes, to the slightly more normal. But most of our theories nowadays come from this man depicted here. This is Sir Edward Gibbon, author of the book The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. It's actually 6 volumes worth of books, which he wrote from 1776 to 1789, and is still a very valuable source for the history of the Roman Empire. And Gibbon said the barbarian tribes were simply too powerful. They invaded the Roman Empire. The moral fiber, the ethical moral fiber of the Romans broke down in the 4th and 5th centuries and were not able any longer to cope with the incursions of the barbarians, and that was it. When we think of the barbarians invading the Roman Empire, we sometimes think of scenes like this. Believe it or not, this is a depiction of the sack of Rome by Alaric the Visigoth in 410 AD, and it was depicted and drawn for a National Geographic magazine in 1962. And the barbarians truly look barbarian. Kind of sloping over, kind of out of control, drunk, wild, looting things, and eyeing women with lewd intent, much like any college party nowadays. This probably wasn't quite the case. Here's another depiction from the 18th century of the sack of Rome in 455 AD by Genseric the Vandal. And again, this is more rape, more murder, more, general bad behavior. Probably wasn't quite like this, however. The barbarians were not, we know today, not quite as overwhelmingly vicious as they appear in those images. So for a long time, it was thought that the barbarians were the cause of the fall of the Roman Empire, till we have Henri Pirenne, pictured here on the right, a great Belgian historian who died in 1935, and his revisionist view is very much accepted today, and he wrote this in his book called Mohammed and Charlemagne, published in 1937. What did Henri Pirenne say that was so different than Edward Gibbon in the 18th century? First of all, Pirenne looked at trade, and he said, after 476, when the last Roman emperor was deposed, was the trade of the Roman world disrupted? And as you'll see here from this trade map, if you will, most of the trade centered around the Mediterranean. Most goods were carried by ship because carrying things by land was extremely difficult, and extremely expensive. The way to go was by ship. So most of the shipping of heavy, particularly heavy bulk goods, was done by sea. And Pirenne said, no, he said, in all of my examination of documents from the 5th century, the 6th century, even into the 7th century, I don't see much disruption of commerce. I still see Syrians, who are the great merchant traders of the ancient world. I see Jews, who are also one of the great trading groups of the ancient world. I still see them in Spain. I still see them in France. I still see them in Italy carrying large ships worth of slaves, wood, iron ore, gold, all sorts of commodities, olives, bringing wheat from North Africa and Sicily, just as they did at the time of the Roman emperors, and yet now they're trading with the Germanic tribes. So he said, when did the economic activity of the Roman Empire end? One more picture about the trade, which you might find interesting, and that is, this is taken from a document known as the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. The Erythraean Sea is what we now call the Red Sea or Arabian Gulf, and this simply indicates that the Romans were well aware of India, the spices that came from India, silk cloth that came from China, and that they were able to obtain it by means of the Red Sea. Going back here now to better times in the Roman Empire, travelers, not only did trade goods travel freely across the Mediterranean, but travelers of all kinds did too. And we see that St. Paul, the disciple of Jesus, was able to travel extensively around the eastern portion of the Mediterranean. Of course, he was much earlier in the 1st century. And at the time of the Emperor Trajan, who we looked at his empire in the beginning of these slides, Trajan moved around quite a bit in the Roman Empire. And we'll notice here, as I click, Trajan was born in Spain, in the lower portion of Spain, today in the area of Cordoba, which was known then as Baetica. He grew up in Syria, in the eastern Mediterranean, where his father was the military governor. He won his first renown fighting with the Emperor Domitian along the Rhine, which we have up there on the border of Gaul and Germany. He won his first major triumphs as a military general by himself in Dacia. And finally, he died fighting the Persians in the far, far east of the Roman Empire near the city of Ctesiphon. So he got all over very easily. Going back to Pirenne, he said, when I look at the Mediterranean Ocean of the 5th, 6th, and 7th centuries, I still see the focal point of the West. I see this circle and this image is really where all the action is taking place, the trade is taking place, people are moving around, goods are being transported. I don't see any disruption at all. The barbarians didn't disrupt the economic life of the Roman world. What did disrupt the economic life of the ancient world? Pirenne said it was the Muslim conquest of much of North Africa, Spain, and the Middle East. And here we see what's called here the Arab-Muslim Empire at its greatest extent, about 750 A.D., which stretches from Persia in the east as far west as Spain. This, he said, is what completely ended the routes of trade across the Mediterranean, ended shipping, ended travel, ended all the commerce that took place, because there were actually 3 major rival empires. There was that of the barbarians in the west, there was the Arabs in the south, Africa, and in the east, and there was the Byzantine Empire, depicted here in a kind of a pale blue color. And since these 3 groups were mutually at odds with one another, the Mediterranean, instead of becoming a passageway and a route for traffic, instead became a battleground. And so Pirenne says, this forces the focus of commerce, culture, politics, everything to the north of Europe, and we see the new Europe emerging from this rectangular area here, which we know today as England, France, Germany, and parts of Italy. This is what he said turns the ancient world away from the Mediterranean and finds its new focus in the centuries to come in France and England and Germany. And so you have the Pirenne Thesis, an important way of understanding how change happened in the ancient